The air in the ballroom was thick with money and lies, the kind of suffocating opulence Flora had escaped a year ago. But Charity demanded attendance. Standing across the room, her ex-husband Preston smirked a predator, spotting weakened prey. He leaned into his new younger companion and whispered a venomous remark just loud enough for the air currents to carry it to Flora's ears. "Look at her trying so hard. Pathetic. No one wants my ex-wife." The words were a poisoned dart finding their mark, but as shame and anger warred within her, the quiet, impeccably dressed man who had been her silent companion for the evening, a man whose name she barely knew, leaned down. He didn't say a word. He simply lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so profound, so deliberate, that the entire room seemed to pause. Preston froze, his smug expression shattering like cheap glass. Flora Beaumont felt the familiar chill long before she heard Preston's words. It was the same chill that used to creep over her skin in their $10 million penthouse, a sterile monument to his success and her slow erasure. It was a coldness that had nothing to do with the thermostat, and everything to do with the man who saw her, not as a wife, but as a tastefully chosen accessory, one he had eventually decided to upgrade. The divorce had been finalized for 13 months, 7 days, and roughly 4 hours. Not that she was counting, she was supposed to be free, but freedom she was discovering felt a lot like poverty and obscurity. The generous settlement Preston's lawyers had hammered out was barely enough to cover the rent on her small studio apartment in a less fashionable part of the city, and the lease on a modest workspace where she could finally truly paint. Painting was the one thing that had been entirely hers, a secret garden Preston had occasionally peered into with dismissive amusement. "It's a cute hobby, Jen," he'd say, patting her head. "Keeps you busy." He never understood that the scent of turpentine was her oxygen, that the colors on her palette were her true vocabulary. Tonight she was here at the annual Patrons of Progress charity gala, only because her best friend Bianca Fiore had practically dragged her. Bianca, a fiercely loyal and brutally honest publicist, had insisted it was time for Jen to re-enter society, and more importantly, network with people who actually buy art. So Flora had poured herself into the one designer dress she'd been allowed to keep a deep sapphire silk that matched the sorrow she often felt lingering in her eyes. She'd spent an hour on her makeup trying to paint a mask of serene confidence over the canvas of her exhaustion. The man beside her was a last-minute arrangement by Bianca. "His name is Rhys Donovan," Bianca had whispered, conspiratorially, before pushing them together. "He's a client's associate. Quiet, keeps to himself, but he needed a +1. Just look elegant and mysterious. It's better than looking desperate." Rhys Donovan was an enigma. He was tall, with a stillness that was somehow more commanding than the boisterous laughter of the finance bros populating the room. He wore a flawlessly tailored tuxedo, but without the peacocking swagger of men like her ex-husband. His eyes, a deep, thoughtful grey, seemed to absorb everything without judgment. They had spoken little, exchanging pleasantries about the abysmal quality of the canapés and the surprisingly decent string quartet. He didn't pry or posture. He simply existed beside her, a calm, solid presence in a sea of sharks. Then she saw him, Preston Holloway. He was holding court near the cascading champagne fountain, his arm possessively wrapped around the waist of his new fiancée, Tiffany Vandermeer. Tiffany was everything. Flora was not blonde, where she was brunette, bubbly, where she was reserved, and her entire being seemed curated to be the perfect smiling adornment. She looked like she was born to wear the diamond choker that glittered at her throat, a piece Flora recognized as the one Preston had refused to buy her for their 5th anniversary, deeming it a frivolous expense. Preston's eyes met hers across the crowded floor. The smile that touched his lips was not a friendly one. It was a sneer of victory, a cold confirmation of his own superiority. He saw her simple dress, her lack of ostentatious jewelry, her quiet companion, and his gaze dripped with condescending pity. Flora's stomach tightened. She tried to turn away to focus on the conversation Reese was having about architectural acoustics, but she could feel Preston's stare like a physical weight. She watched as he leaned toward Tiffany, his mouth close to her ear. The distance was too great to hear, but Flora knew the cadence of his cruelty. She had been the recipient of those whispers for years. Whispers about a fellow guest's unfortunate fashion choice, a colleague's business failure, her own weight fluctuations. Then, as a path momentarily cleared between their groups, Preston's voice, a low and carrying baritone, deliberately sliced through the ambient chatter. "Look at her trying so hard. Pathetic. No one wants my ex-wife." The words hit her with the force of a physical blow. The air rushed from her lungs. The room, with its glittering chandeliers and laughing faces, receded into a blurry, soundless tunnel. Every insecurity, every fear that had haunted her lonely nights coalesced into a single searing point of shame. He was right. Who was she? A failed wife, a struggling artist no one had heard of, a 34-year-old woman starting over with nothing but paint-stained hands and a broken heart. Tears pricked the back of her eyes, hot and threatening. She willed them back, her jaw clenched so tight it ached. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her cry. And then it happened. The quiet man beside her, Reese Donovan, who had seemingly been oblivious, moved with an unnerving grace. He turned slightly, placing himself just a little more in front of her, a subtle shield. He didn't look at Preston. He didn't even look at her face. His gaze fell to her hand, which was clenched into a white-knuckled fist at her side. Gently, he reached out and took her hand. His touch was warm and firm, uncurling her tense fingers. He lifted her hand to his lips, his eyes finally meeting hers over her knuckles. They were filled with an expression she couldn't decipher. Not pity, but something like respect and anger, an anger not directed at her. He pressed a soft, deliberate kiss to the back of her hand. It was an old-world gesture, profoundly intimate and shockingly public. It wasn't a lover's caress. It was a declaration, a silent, damning rebuttal to Preston's venom. A collective intake of breath seemed to ripple through their immediate vicinity. Conversations stuttered and died. All eyes were on them. Flora's gaze flickered past Reese's shoulder to her ex-husband, Preston Holloway. The man who was never rattled, the master of every room he entered, was frozen solid. His mouth was slightly agape, the smug smirk wiped clean from his face, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. His eyes, wide with disbelief, darted from Flora's hand to Reese's face, a dawning horror spreading across his features. He didn't just see a random man defending his ex-wife. In that moment, he saw someone he was supposed to recognize, and the implications sent a visible tremor through him. The billionaire had kissed her hand, and in doing so, he had just declared war. The ballroom felt like a stage, and a spotlight had just been thrown on Flora. The kiss lingered on her skin, a warm imprint against the icy shock. For a beat, no one moved. Then Reese released her hand as gently as he had taken it, his expression unreadable. He leaned in, his voice a low murmur meant only for her. "I believe the air in here has become rather stale. Shall we—" He didn't wait for a verbal answer, simply placed a light hand on the small of her back and began guiding her toward the grand doors leading to the terrace. The movement broke the spell. A cacophony of whispers erupted in their wake. Flora felt hundreds of eyes on her back, but for the first time she didn't feel their judgment. She felt shielded. As they passed Preston's group, she chanced a glance. Tiffany was staring at her with a newfound, almost fearful respect. Preston looked as though he'd been slapped. His face was a mottled red, his eyes narrowed with a furious confusion. He knew power when he saw it, and the quiet authority with which Reese Donovan had just acted screamed of a level of influence that dwarfed his own corporate bullying. The cool night air of the terrace was a welcome relief. It overlooked a meticulously landscaped garden, the scent of night-blooming jasmine mixing with the distant sounds of city traffic. "Are you all right, Miss Beaumont?" Reese asked, his voice, still calm, as if he hadn't just thrown a social grenade into the most exclusive party of the season. I I think so," Flora stammered, wrapping her arms around herself. "Thank you. You didn't have to do that." "On the contrary," he said, turning to lean against the stone balustrade, his silhouette sharp against the city lights. "Men like your ex-husband operate on the assumption of their victims' silence and shame. Refusing to be silent is not just a choice. It is a necessity." He said victim with such clinical precision, it sent a shiver down her spine. He saw it. He saw the whole dynamic for exactly what it was. "You know him?" She asked the question, tumbling out. "I know of him," Reese corrected. "Preston Holloway, partner at Sterling Finch and Holloway, known for aggressive acquisitions and leaving a trail of scorched earth. We've circled the same airspace on occasion." The vagueness of his statement hinted at a world of high-stakes business she had only ever glimpsed through the lens of Preston's bragging. "Why?" she asked, more to herself than to him. "Why would you do that for me?" Reese was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the skyline. "My late wife was a sculptor," he said, finally, his voice softer, now imbued with a deep, resonant sadness. "She was brilliant, and for years, people, patrons, critics, even her own family, told her work was charming, or a lovely pastime. They never saw the steel in her. They saw a woman with a hobby. I learned too late, perhaps, that the most potent defense of an artist's soul is to afford it the dignity and respect it deserves, especially when it is under attack." Flora was stunned into silence. This wasn't a playboy's gallant gesture. It was something rooted in personal pain, in a profound understanding she never would have expected. "I'm so sorry for your loss," she said quietly. He gave a small, sad smile. "Thank you. Her name was Livia. She would have liked you. She had no patience for bullies." They stood in a comfortable silence for a few minutes before he spoke again, his tone shifting back to something more businesslike. "Bianca Fiore mentioned you are a painter." "I am," Flora confirmed, a familiar knot of insecurity tightening in her chest. "She speaks very highly of your work. She called it emotionally raw and technically brilliant. She is not one for idle flattery." Flora flushed. "Bianca is a very good friend. And she also told me you're preparing for a small exhibition at the Co-op Gallery downtown," he continued. "In a few months, yes. It's the first time I'll be showing my new work. The work I've done since—" She trailed off. "Since you left the Gilded Cage?" He finished for her, his perception unnervingly accurate. "May I see it?" The question caught her off guard. "See it?" "Your work. In your studio," he clarified. "I am not merely a connoisseur of architectural acoustics. I am also a collector, and the Donovan Foundation has a vested interest in supporting emerging artists. Artists with steel." The offer hung in the air, glittering with possibility. This wasn't a pity date or a social favor. It was a professional inquiry. From him, Reese Donovan, a name she was beginning to realize carried a weight she couldn't yet comprehend. It was a lifeline thrown from the most unexpected of quarters. "Of course," she heard herself say, her voice steadier than she felt. "I would be honored." He handed her a simple, heavy cardstock business card. It bore only his name, a phone number, and an email address. No company, no title. It didn't need one. "My assistant will call you to arrange a time," he said. "Now I think we have provided the gossips with enough material for one evening. I'll have my driver take you home." As she was whisked away in a silent, impossibly luxurious sedan, Flora's mind reeled. She looked back at the Grand Hotel. She could still feel the phantom warmth of his lips on her hand, and the chill of Preston's frozen, furious stare. Her ex-husband had tried to define her as an unwanted object, but in a single quiet gesture, Reese Donovan had suggested she might just be a priceless work of art. The next morning the call came. Not from an assistant, but from Rhys Donovan himself. He wanted to visit her studio. That afternoon, Flora's studio was her sanctuary and her battlefield. It was a large, drafty space in a converted warehouse district, worlds away from the polished marble and glass of her former life. The air was thick with the smells of linseed oil, oiled turpentine, and brewing coffee. Canvases in various stages of completion leaned against every wall. Drop cloths, stained with a rainbow of colours, covered the floor. It was messy, it was chaotic, and it was the only place she felt completely herself. The news of Rhys Donovan's impending visit sent her into a controlled panic. She didn't tidy up the chaos, was part of her process, but she did put on a clean shirt, wiped the stray paint smudge off her cheek, and made a fresh pot of coffee. She was terrified. What if he saw her work and agreed with Preston? What if it was just a cute hobby, after all? When he arrived precisely at the arranged time, he seemed utterly unfazed by the gritty industrial setting. He wore simple charcoal trousers and a grey cashmere sweater, looking as comfortable here as he had in his tuxedo. "Miss Beaumont," he greeted her with a small nod. "Thank you for accommodating me on such short notice. Flora, please, and thank you for coming." He didn't engage in small talk. His eyes immediately began to roam the room, taking in the canvases. He moved with a slow, deliberate purpose, like a curator examining a new acquisition. He didn't just glance, he looked. He studied the texture of the paint, the violence of one brushstroke, the quiet sorrow of another. Flora's work since the divorce was a departure from her earlier, more decorative pieces. It was raw, abstract, and deeply personal. One large canvas was a maelstrom of furious reds and blacks, slashed through with a defiant sliver of gold. Another was a study in blues and greys, a suffocating, almost claustrophobic composition that captured the feeling of being trapped. A third, her most recent, was different. It was filled with tentative greens and yellows, the colours of a fragile, hesitant spring. She held her breath watching him. He spent nearly 10 minutes in front of the furious red canvas. His head tilted, his expression unreadable. He moved to the blue one, his hands clasped behind his back. He lingered there, too. Finally, he turned to her. His grey eyes were serious, intense. "This is a narrative of survival," he said. It wasn't a question. Flora felt a lump form in her throat. Yes, I suppose it is." "Anger," he said, gesturing to the red painting. "Desolation." He nodded toward the blue. "And this one?" He walked over to the canvas of hesitant spring. "This is hope, but it's a cautious hope, the kind that has been earned." He understood. He didn't need her to explain it. He saw the story she had bled onto the canvas. For the first time, a genuine, unforced smile touched Flora's lips. "No one has ever gotten it like that before," she admitted, her voice thick with emotion. "Then they weren't looking properly," he stated simply. "Preston Holloway is a fool, not just for what he said, but for what he was incapable of seeing." He then walked to a smaller piece she had tucked away, almost hidden behind a stack of supplies. It was a self-portrait, but not of her face. It was a painting of her hands, stained with paint clenched around a broken paintbrush that she was painstakingly trying to mend with gold leaf. A nod to the Japanese art of kintsugi, where broken pottery is repaired with gold, making it more beautiful for having been broken. "This one," Rhys said, his voice low. "This one is the masterpiece. May I purchase it?" Flora was flabbergasted. "Purchase it? But it's not even—" "I wasn't going to show it." "It's the most honest piece in the room," he countered. "It's about the process of rebuilding. It's the prologue to all the others. Name your price." She stammered, completely unprepared. I don't know. $5,000? It was more than she'd ever sold a single piece for in her life. Rhys didn't even blink. "My office will wire $25,000 to your account this afternoon. We'll also cover the costs for framing and insuring all the pieces for your upcoming exhibition at the Co-op. Consider it a grant from the Donovan Foundation to ensure you are unencumbered by financial constraints as you prepare. Flora sank onto a nearby stool, her knees weak. 25. I don't know what to say. Say you'll keep painting, he said, and say you'll have dinner with me tomorrow night. Not as a collector or a patron, but as a man who enjoys the company of a woman with steel in her soul. The invitation was gentle, devoid of pressure. It was a request, not a demand. It was everything Preston's overtures had never been. Yes, she said, a genuine warmth spreading through her chest. I'd like that very much. Meanwhile, across town, Preston Holloway was having a very different kind of day. The gala incident had become the talk of their social circle. He'd spent the morning fielding calls from concerned friends, all fishing for gossip. The question on everyone's lips was the same. Who was the man with Flora Preston's initial shock had morphed into a cold, seething rage? He'd had his top associate, a weaselly man named Jeffrey, spend the entire morning digging. The name Rhys Donovan had at first yielded surprisingly little. He wasn't on the flashy society pages. He didn't flaunt his wealth. But when Jeffrey had cross-referenced the name with global finance and tech sectors, the blood had drained from his face. Rhys Donovan wasn't just rich. He was a ghost, a titan of industry who operated in the stratosphere far above Preston's world. He owned tech patents that powered half the world's smartphones, had controlling interests in renewable energy firms, and his private equity company, Donovan Capital, swallowed other companies for breakfast. He was notoriously private, almost reclusive. For him to make such a public gesture was unheard of. It makes no sense, Preston snarled, pacing his office that overlooked the city. Why her, a penniless artist living in a hovel? What could he possibly want with Flora? Jeffrey shifted nervously. Sir, there's more. I looked into the Donovan Foundation. It's one of the largest private arts endowments in the world. They've launched entire careers. They're kingmakers. The word hung in the air. Kingmaker. The idea of Flora, his meek, pliable Flora, being crowned by anyone was ludicrous. The thought of her succeeding without him thriving because of another man was intolerable. It was a direct challenge to his narrative, to the world he had so carefully constructed, where he was the sun and everyone else were merely planets in his orbit. Find out where her gallery show is, Preston commanded, his voice dangerously low. Find out the name of the gallery owner. I don't care what it takes. This little fairy tale of hers is going to end before it even begins. He would not be humiliated. He would not be upstaged. He would remind Flora and the entire world that nothing he discarded ever became a treasure. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind for Flora. The grant from the Donovan Foundation was a godsend, freeing her from the gnawing anxiety of bills and allowing her to purchase the highest quality canvases and paints. But more than the money, it was the validation that fueled her. Someone saw her. Someone believed in her. Her dinners with Rhys became a regular occurrence. They were never extravagant. They'd find quiet restaurants where they could talk for hours. He spoke of his late wife Livia with a love that was still raw but also beautiful. He described her passion, her frustration with the art world, and her unwavering belief in the power of creation. In turn, Flora found herself opening up about her decade with Preston, not as a litany of complaints, but as an analysis of her own slow awakening. Rhys listened, truly listened, his insightful questions helping her piece together parts of her own story she hadn't fully understood. He never touched her, not beyond a hand on her elbow, to guide her, or a brief touch of hands across the table to emphasize a point. The respect he showed her was a balm on wounds she hadn't known were still so deep. It was a slow, gentle courtship of the mind and soul, and she found herself falling not for his wealth, but for the quiet strength of his character. Her art reflected this new chapter. The canvases became brighter, the compositions more daring. The cautious hope in her spring painting began to blossom into a confident summer. Mr. Bertrand Galliano, the owner of the Co-op Gallery, was ecstatic. "Flora, this new work is a revelation," he exclaimed during a visit to her studio. "It has all the raw power of your earlier pieces, but with a new layer of transcendence. The show is going to be a massive success. I've already had several influential critics express keen interest after I sent them a few preliminary images. The opening night was set. Invitations were sent. A small, respected arts journal was planning a feature. For the first time, Flora felt the solid ground of a future she was building for herself. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't notice the storm gathering on the horizon. Preston, true to his word, had been busy. Through his network of corporate spies and legal intimidation, he had zeroed in on the Co-op Gallery and its owner, Galliano. The Co-op was a passion project for Galliano, a respected but financially vulnerable institution that survived on grants and the goodwill of its patrons. It was a soft target. Preston didn't make a direct threat. He was too clever for that. He began to move his pieces on the board with chilling precision. First, a major corporate sponsor of the gallery, a bank where Preston's firm held significant sway, suddenly announced they were re-evaluating their philanthropic commitments and pulled their annual funding, citing vague economic pressures. It was a huge blow to the gallery's operating budget. Next, the building that housed the gallery was suddenly slapped with a series of surprise code violations from the city minor, bureaucratic infractions that had been overlooked for years, but were now being enforced with draconian zeal, demanding expensive and immediate repairs. Mr. Galliano was baffled and overwhelmed. The final move was the most insidious. Preston used a shell corporation to approach Mr. Galliano with an offer he couldn't refuse. The offer was to buy the gallery's most valuable asset, the long-term lease on its prime downtown location. The Shell Corp offered to pay 3 times its market value, an astronomical sum that would solve all of Galliano's newfound financial woes and set him up for a comfortable retirement. The only condition was that the sale had to be immediate, and the new owners would be terminating the gallery's lease to convert the space into a luxury retail store. All upcoming exhibitions, including Flora's, would be cancelled. Mr. Galliano was tormented. He loved his gallery, he believed in his artists, but he was being squeezed from all sides. He was an art lover, not a brawler. He didn't see the coordinated attack. He only saw a string of terrible luck and an unexpected, glittering lifeboat. The night before she was due to hang her paintings, Flora received a call. It was a distraught Mr. Galliano. "Flora, my dear, I have terrible, terrible news," he began, his voice cracking. "There's been a development. The gallery, I've had to sell the lease. The show, it's cancelled." The phone felt slick in Flora's hand. "Cancelled? What are you talking about? It's tomorrow. I am so sorry. I had no choice. The finances, the building violations. It was impossible," he stammered, clearly ashamed. "The new owners are shutting it down, effective immediately." Flora's blood ran cold. This wasn't bad luck. A pulled sponsorship, surprise violations, and a buyout offer, too good to be true, all happening within weeks of her show. It was a targeted demolition. It had Preston's fingerprints all over it. The elation of the past months evaporated, replaced by a familiar, sickening dread. He had found a way to get to her, to smash her dreams, just as they were about to be realized. He was proving his point. Anything he threw away would turn to dust. Tears of rage and frustration streamed down her face. She hung up the phone and hurled a paint-stained rag across the studio. It hit a canvas with a pathetic splat. She was back in the cage, the bars forged not of steel this time, but of her ex-husband's vindictive, far-reaching power. She sank to the floor, surrounded by the beautiful, hopeful art that was now homeless. She felt small, foolish, and utterly defeated. After allowing herself 10 minutes to cry, she took a shaky breath. The old Flora would have accepted this, would have crawled into bed and let the defeat wash over her. But the woman who had stared into Rhys Donovan's respectful eyes, the woman who had painted her own resilience in gold leaf, was not going to break. Her hand trembled as she picked up her phone. She scrolled to his name. She had wanted to succeed on her own, to prove she didn't need a powerful man to save her. But this wasn't about being saved. This was about fighting a war she couldn't win alone. This was an attack on both of them. She pressed the call button. "Rhys," she said, her voice hoarse but steady when he answered. "It's Flora. We have a problem. I think Preston just tried to ruin me." The silence on the other end of the line was short, but heavy with unspoken fury. When Rhys spoke, his voice was dangerously calm, a low-frequency hum that promised retribution. "Tell me everything, Flora. Don't leave out a single detail." She recounted the entire story from Mr. Galliano's panicked call to her own chilling realization of Preston's orchestration. As she spoke, she could almost picture Rhys on the other end, his grey eyes turning to slate, his mind piecing together the corporate maneuvering with a speed and clarity she couldn't possess. "A shell corporation buying the lease," he mused when she finished. "Aggressive but sloppy. He's letting his anger make him predictable. Stay where you are. I'm sending someone for you. We'll meet at my office." Less than 20 minutes later, a black car, even more discreet and luxurious than the first one, was waiting for her. She was driven not to a flashy skyscraper, but to an unassuming and elegant brownstone in a historic district. Inside, the decor was a testament to quiet power, modern art, including, she noticed with a jolt, her own kintsugi hands painting beautifully framed and lit in a place of honor, rich mahogany and cutting-edge technology seamlessly integrated into the classic architecture. Rhys was waiting for her in his study, a room lined with books from floor to ceiling. He wasn't on the phone barking orders. He was standing by the window, looking out at the private garden, a single file folder on the large desk in front of him. He turned as she entered, and the cold anger in his eyes was startling. "He will regret this," Rhys said, not as a boast, but as a statement of fact. "He has mistaken a personal vendetta for a sound business strategy, and he has done so within my sphere of interest. That is a fatal error." He gestured for her to sit, then opened the folder on his desk. "Preston Holloway has made a career of hostile takeovers. He uses legal loopholes and financial pressure to break smaller companies, then sells them off for parts. It's a vulture's business model. I know this because 5 years ago his firm, Sterling Finch and Holloway, attempted to do the same to a small but innovative biotech firm I had provided seed funding for. They failed. I made sure of it." This was the connection. This wasn't just about her. Preston had crossed Rhys long before that night at the gala. Flora was now the unfortunate battlefield for a pre-existing war. "What he's done to your gallery," Rhys continued, his voice precise, "is a miniature version of his standard playbook. He identified the asset, your success. He identified the vulnerabilities of your partner, Mr. Galliano's finances, and he applied pressure from multiple angles to force a sale. What he doesn't know is who he's up against." He picked up his phone and pressed a single button. "Catherine," he said into the receiver, "initiate the Donovan directive. Target the Shell Corporation, Viridian Properties, LLC. I want its parent company, its funding sources, and its beneficial owners identified. I want to know every transaction it has made in the last 48 hours. And get me everything you have on Sterling Finch and Holloway's current leveraged positions. I want a full vulnerability report. You have 1 hour." He hung up. The efficiency was breathtaking. "What's the Donovan directive?" Flora asked, feeling like she'd just walked onto the set of a spy thriller. A rare, thin smile touched Rhys's lips. "Let's call it my foundation's way of dealing with bullies. We have a very talented team of forensic accountants and researchers. They typically ensure our philanthropic investments are sound, but they are also very good at untangling complicated knots. He then turned his full attention to her. But this is not just my fight, it's yours. He did this to hurt you. So the solution should not just be about stopping him, but about elevating you. Cancelling the show is not an option. We're going to move it. Move it, Reese. It's tomorrow night. I own a building on 57th Street, he said, as if discussing the weather. The ground floor is a vacant retail space currently between tenants. It has 20-foot ceilings, excellent lighting, and more foot traffic in an hour than the co-op gets in a month. My team can have it transformed into a world-class gallery space by tomorrow afternoon. Flora's mind struggled to keep up. But the invitations, the press... Bianca is a miracle worker, is she not? He asked with a knowing look. I'm sure she would relish the challenge of announcing a last-minute venue change to a more prestigious location, hinting at a major new patron. The mystique alone will double the attendance. As for the press, he tapped his desk. The arts editor of the New York Times owes me a favor. I believe she will be very interested in the story of an artist who was the target of a vicious corporate sabotage plot, only to be rescued and championed by the Donovan Foundation. He was turning Preston's attack into the single greatest PR opportunity of her life. He wasn't just deflecting the blow, he was using its momentum to launch her into the stratosphere. He wanted to make you invisible, Reese, said his voice softening as he looked at her. Instead, we are going to make you inescapable. Just then, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it. Ah, that was fast. He read the screen, a look of cold satisfaction on his face. Viridian Properties, LLC, as I suspected, a disposable entity funded by a blind trust, which is in turn funded by a Cayman Islands account. However, the initial seed money transfer was sloppy. It came from a discretionary bonus account belonging to Preston Holloway. He had him, clean. He's over-leveraged personally on a deal to short a tech company. Reese continued scrolling through the information on his phone. A very risky, very arrogant bet. If that company's stock were to, say, receive a sudden massive infusion of capital from an unexpected investor driving the price up instead of down, well, it would be financially catastrophic for anyone betting against it. Flora stared at him, at this quiet, thoughtful man who wielded power with the precision of a surgeon. He wasn't just going to save her show, he was going to systematically dismantle the man who had tried to destroy her. What do you want to do, Flora? Reese asked, his eyes locking with hers. I can handle this quietly. Make him back off. Or we can proceed with the show and let him walk into the trap. The choice is yours. The old Flora would have wanted it to just go away, but she looked at the painting of her own hands on his wall, the hands that were made more beautiful for having been broken and repaired. Let's have a party, she said, a slow, determined smile spreading across her face. Let him come. The next 36 hours were a masterclass in controlled chaos. A fleet of professionals dispatched by Reese descended upon the vacant space on 57th Street. Walls were painted, gallery lighting was installed, and a temporary sound system was discreetly hidden. Her paintings were collected from her studio by fine art handlers and hung with curatorial precision. By the evening of the show, the cavernous space had been transformed into a gallery that rivaled any in Chelsea. Bianca Fiore, fueled by righteous fury and an endless supply of espresso, was in her element. She blasted out a press release and a social media blitz that was a work of art in itself. It spoke of a last-minute venue upgrade to a secret exclusive location, hinted at a major new force in art patronage, and framed the event as the most talked-about, must-attend opening of the year. The original invitations were now coveted tickets to an even more exclusive affair. The RSVP list swelled with names that made Flora's head spin: critics collectors, celebrities, and art world power brokers. Flora herself felt strangely calm amidst the storm. She walked through the new gallery space, seeing her work, her story displayed so beautifully under the brilliant lights. Her journey from rage to desolation to hope was laid bare for the world to see. This was her truth. Whatever happened, she had created this. She chose to wear a simple, elegant black dress, allowing the art to be the star of the show. Reese stood with her as the first guests arrived, a quiet, reassuring presence at her side. He introduced her to influential people, not as his plus one, but as the artist Flora Beaumont. His voice filled with pride. The room buzzed with energy. People weren't just looking at the paintings, they were consuming them. She heard snippets of conversation, astonishing depth, a powerful new voice, completely fearless. Red dots indicating a sale began to appear beside the paintings with startling frequency. Mr. Galliano was there, looking dazed and overjoyed, having been personally invited by Reese, who had also quietly assured him that a consortium of anonymous art lovers was being formed to secure the co-op gallery's future. Then, through the glass doors, she saw him. Preston Holloway arrived with Tiffany Vandermeer on his arm. He clearly hadn't gotten the memo about his plan's failure. He wore a look of supreme confidence, a conqueror arriving to survey the ruins of his enemy. He expected to find a cancelled event, a locked door, perhaps a weeping Flora. Instead, he walked into a brightly lit packed gallery, the sound of champagne corks popping, an excited chatter filling the air. He stopped dead in his tracks, his smug expression melting into utter disbelief. His eyes scanned the room, taking in the A-list crowd, the professional setup, and Flora standing radiant and poised at the center of it all. He saw her, and his face contorted into a mask of pure fury. This was impossible. He had crushed her. He had won. And yet here she was, thriving more than ever before. Ignoring Tiffany, he began to stride toward Flora, a man on a collision course. The crowd parted slightly, sensing the impending drama. Reese put a steadying hand on Flora's arm, but she gave a small shake of her head. This was her fight. "What is this?" Preston hissed as he reached her, his voice a low snarl. "How did you do this?" "Hello, Preston," Flora said, her voice cool and even. "Welcome to my show. I'm so glad you could make it." "You were finished," he spat, his eyes darting around wildly. "The gallery was closed. I made sure of it." It was a confession blurted out in his rage. "Plans change," Flora said simply. "It turns out my work has found a more discerning benefactor." Preston's gaze finally landed on Reese, who was watching him with an expression of profound disinterest, like a biologist observing a particularly unpleasant insect. Preston's face went white as the final pieces clicked into place. "You..." He breathed, a new kind of fear creeping into his eyes. "Donovan, this was you." "Mr. Holloway," Reese said, his voice polite but edged with ice. "You are trespassing in a private building at a private event to which you were not invited. I suggest you leave." But Preston was too far gone, his narcissism wounded beyond repair. He turned back to Flora, his face ugly with scorn. "So this is it. You left me for a bigger wallet. How pathetic. You're nothing without a man to pay your way. You're a leech, Flora. You always have been." This was it. The final desperate attempt to diminish her, to strip her of her own agency. But the words had lost their power. She was no longer the woman who would absorb his poison. And this was the moment for the final unexpected twist. It wasn't about Reese's money or power. It was about a secret Flora had kept for years. "A leech, Preston," she said, her voice ringing with newfound clarity and strength, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. "That's an interesting choice of words. I was just remembering something from our marriage. All those late nights you spent working on the Langford merger. Do you remember that?" Preston's eyes widened slightly. "What are you talking about? I remember you coming home so proud." Flora continued, her voice growing stronger. "You told me how you'd found a loophole, a way to use insider information from a friend at a rival firm to structure the deal. You called it brilliant. I didn't understand the details then, I just packed it away like so many other things I didn't want to see." But I never forgot the name of your friend. A Mr. Peterson, wasn't it? Preston looked as though she had physically struck him. Insider trading. It was the cardinal sin of his profession, a career-ending, potentially jail time-worthy crime. He had confessed it to her in a moment of hubris, never imagining his artist wife was listening, let alone that she would ever remember or understand. "You're lying," he choked out, but the sweat beading on his forehead told a different story. "Am I?" Flora countered. She looked past him to a man standing near the entrance, a man who had gone unnoticed until now. Bianca's firm happens to represent a journalist who specializes in financial crimes. He's been looking into some of your firm's more creative accounting for a while now. I believe he'll find Mr. Peterson's name very interesting. It was the final devastating blow. It wasn't Reese's power that had undone him. It was his own arrogance. It was the ghost of his own crime brought to light by the woman he had dismissed as insignificant. Preston Holloway stood there exposed and utterly defeated, not by a billionaire's wealth, but by his ex-wife's memory. He stared at her, at this strong, formidable woman she had become, and for the first time he looked truly afraid. Without another word, he turned and fled, leaving Tiffany standing alone and bewildered in his wake. A hush fell over the room, followed by a ripple of applause. Flora had not only survived, she had triumphed on her own terms using her own strength. Reese looked at her, and the pride in his eyes was overwhelming. He took her hand, the same one he had kissed at the gala, and this time he didn't just kiss her knuckles. He brought it to his heart and simply held it there. In front of everyone, he was no longer just her patron. He was her partner. The aftermath of the gallery opening was swift and decisive. The journalist, armed with the name Flora had provided, broke a story that sent shockwaves through the financial world. An official investigation was launched into the Langford merger and other questionable deals at Sterling Finch and Holloway. Preston was forced to resign in disgrace, his reputation shattered. The risky short-selling bet he had made collapsed spectacularly as Reese, through an anonymous subsidiary, invested heavily in the targeted tech company, turning Preston's gamble into a personal financial apocalypse. He lost his fortune, his career, and his fiancée, Tiffany, who wasted no time in distancing herself from the scandal. Preston Holloway, the man who believed he was the center of the universe, had become a pariah. He had tried to snuff out Flora's small candle and had ended up burning down his own empire. Flora, by contrast, became a star. The story of the sabotage and her triumphant last-minute show was irresistible to the media. She was hailed not just as a talented artist, but as a symbol of resilience. Her exhibition was extended twice due to popular demand, and every single piece sold many to prestigious international collectors Reese had discreetly invited. Museums began making inquiries. Critics lauded her as the voice of a new, unapologetic female expressionism. She was no longer Preston's ex-wife. She was Flora Beaumont, the artist. Her life found a new, beautiful rhythm. She bought the warehouse that housed her studio, ensuring it would always be her sanctuary. She worked not with the frantic desperation of before, but with the calm, focused joy of an artist who knew her worth. Her relationship with Reese deepened, growing far beyond the dramatic circumstances that had brought them together. They built their connection in the quiet moments, cooking dinner together in her messy studio kitchen, walking hand in hand through art museums on Sunday afternoons, and spending long, lazy weekends at his secluded lakeside home, where she would paint and he would read content in their shared silence. He never tried to change her or direct her. He was the ultimate patron, not just of her art, but of her spirit. He celebrated her successes as if they were his own and provided a safe harbor for her doubts. He loved her for the steel he had first recognized, but also for the fragile, hopeful colors she was now painting into her life. One evening, about a year after her show, they were sitting on the terrace of his city brownstone, the same spot where he had first told her about his late wife. The city lights twinkled below them. I was thinking about that first night at the gala, Flora said softly, leaning her head on his shoulder. I was so broken. I believed what he said was true. He was projecting, Reese said, wrapping his arm around her. His own fear of being unwanted, of being insignificant without his money and power. He tried to force that fear onto you. And you, she said, looking up at him. You saw something else. I saw the truth. He replied, his thumb gently stroking her cheek. I saw a woman who was painting her way out of the darkness. I saw an artist whose hands were made of gold, even if she didn't know it yet. He leaned in and kissed her a kiss that held none of the drama of their first encounters, but all the depth of the love that had grown between them. It was a kiss of partnership, of respect, and of a shared future. Flora Beaumont had once been an accessory in a gilded cage. She had been told she was worthless, discarded, and unwanted. But she had learned that true value isn't bestowed by others. It's forged in the fires of your own survival. Her life was now her own masterpiece, a vibrant symphony of color and light made all the more beautiful for the dark canvases that had come before. And she was just getting started. And so Flora's story isn't just about escaping a toxic past or finding a billionaire prince. It's a powerful reminder that our worth is never defined by those who try to diminish us. It's about the moment we stop listening to the whispers of doubt and start listening to the strength within our own souls. Flora's triumph wasn't when Rhys Donovan kissed her hand. It was when she realized her own hands were capable of rebuilding her world more beautiful and resilient than before. Her victory wasn't just in exposing Preston's crimes, but in reclaiming her own narrative and painting a future he could never have imagined for her.
When a man's final cruel prophecy is shattered in the most spectacular way imaginable. For Emma Vance, the final words her celebrity ex-husband, Julian Thorne, ever spoke to her were a curse. You're nothing without me. No one will ever want you. You will die alone. He said it with the smug certainty of a man who believed he had authored her entire existence. But what Julian didn't count on, what the world couldn't have predicted, was that the universe had a flair for irony. Less than 12 hours later, Emma Vance wouldn't just be fine. She'd be on the front page of every major news outlet, her name a global trending topic, all because of a single candid photograph, her hand held gently, securely in the hand of the world's most enigmatic and untouchable billionaire. This isn't just a story about revenge, it's about what happens the morning after your world ends. The air in the penthouse was cold. It wasn't the fault of the climate control, a state-of-the-art system Julian Thorne had often boasted about in interviews for architectural magazines. It was a frigid, soul-deep cold that emanated from the man himself. Julian, with his perfectly coiffed silver hair and a smile engineered for talk show sofas, stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the sparkling expanse of New York City, as if he owned it. In many ways, he thought he did. It's all signed Emma, he said, not turning to look at her. His voice, the same one that calmed millions of his followers with platitudes about unlocking your inner power, was now clipped and sharp, a shard of glass. Emma Vance clutched the pen in her hand, her knuckles white. The final divorce paper sat on the vast marble island in the kitchen, a kitchen she had designed from the veining in the stone to the specific shade of brushed brass on the handles. It was a space meant for warmth, for laughter, for the life she thought they were building. Now, it was just a stage for her public execution. I know, Julian, she whispered. Her voice was hoarse. She hadn't slept in days. For 10 years, she had been Mrs. Thorne, the quiet, supportive wife of the self-help magnate Julian Thorne, author of the global bestseller The Architect of You. She had been the one who edited his manuscripts until 3 in the morning, who fact-checked his research, who coached him through his anxieties before every major speech. She had sacrificed her own burgeoning career as an academic, specializing in Renaissance art, to build his empire, believing his success was their success. The cracks had started as hairline fractures. His casual dismissal of her opinions, his gaslighting her memories of events, the way he'd subtly mock her in front of their influential friends. Then came the affairs which he'd explained away as the unfortunate but necessary burdens of a man of his stature. The final break came when she discovered he wasn't just having an affair. He had a long-term partner, a younger, more malleable version of herself, already installed in a condo he'd bought downtown. Good. He finally turned his eyes, sweeping over her with disdain. She wore a simple grey cashmere sweater and jeans, a stark contrast to his tailored Zegna suit. She felt like a ghost in her own home. The movers will be here tomorrow for my remaining effects. Your things? Well, you don't have much, do you? I'll have them put in storage. You have 30 days to collect them. Every word was a calculated blow. He knew her things were mostly books, research papers, and sentimental items from her family, things that held no monetary value to him. Where am I supposed to go, Julian? She asked the question, tasting like ash. The penthouse was in his name. The bank accounts had been systematically drained into trusts she couldn't access. Her lawyer, a timid man overwhelmed by Julian's legal Rottweilers, had managed to secure her a settlement that was, in Julian's world, pocket change. It was enough to live on for a year, maybe 2, if she was frugal. It was an insult disguised as a severance package. He smirked, a cruel twisting of the lips that never reached his televised eyes. I don't know, Emma. That's your problem now, isn't it? You wanted to be independent. So be independent. He walked over to the island, picking up his pristine leather briefcase. He didn't even glance at her. He was already moving on. Tears pricked at her eyes, hot and shameful. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. She straightened her back, lifting her chin. I will. Her defiance seemed to amuse him. He paused at the door, turning back for one final devastating volley. His face was a mask of mock pity. You know, I almost feel sorry for you, he said, his voice dropping into the intimate conspiratorial tone he used on his podcasts. You poured everything into me. You have no career, no connections of your own. You're, 36? Past your prime, darling. The world is a brutal place for women like you. He stepped closer, his expensive cologne suffocating her. He leaned in his voice, a venomous whisper in her ear. Let me give you one last piece of free advice, my dear ex-wife. No one will ever want you. You're nothing without me. You carry the stench of failure. Men of quality, men of substance, they want a winner. They don't want someone's discarded leftovers. You will die alone. He pulled back, a look of profound satisfaction on his face. He had delivered his curse. It was the final brick in the wall he had built around her heart. And then he was gone. The heavy door clicked shut, the sound echoing in the cavernous, empty space. For a long moment, Emma didn't move. She just stood there, his words slithering into the cracks of her broken confidence. No one will ever want you. You will die alone. She finally let out a ragged sob, collapsing against the cold marble. The city lights outside blurred into a cruel, glittering mockery. Julian was right. She had given him her youth, her intellect, her loyalty. And in return, he had taken her name, her home, her future, and left her with nothing but a curse ringing in her ears. In that moment, sitting alone in the ruins of her life, she believed him. The next few weeks were a blur of beige. Beige boxes, beige walls of a tiny third-floor walk-up in Brooklyn, and a beige, flavorless existence. Emma had found the apartment in a daze. It was all she could afford. The grand views of Central Park were replaced by a view of a brick wall and a perpetually overflowing dumpster. The scent of fresh orchids Julian insisted on was replaced by the smell of damp old wood and her neighbor's cooking. She unpacked the few boxes Julian's men hadn't accidentally misplaced. Her books, her precious companions, filled makeshift shelves. Her research notes on the artist Artemisia Gentileschi, a female painter who had triumphed over immense personal violation and patriarchal oppression, felt like a cruel joke. Emma had once dreamed of writing the definitive book on her. Now she could barely summon the energy to read the titles. Julian's curse echoed in the cramped space. "No one will ever want you." It became the soundtrack to her lonely nights. She'd scroll through social media, a masochistic ritual. Julian was thriving. He was photographed with A-list actors giving talks at prestigious conferences, and his new girlfriend, a model named Crystal, was splashed across his Instagram, always laughing, always perfect. He had already rewritten their history, painting himself as the patient husband who had finally freed himself from a negative and uninspiring partner. His followers lapped it up, flooding his comments with praise for his strength and authenticity. Emma's only lifeline was Chloe Davies. Chloe, a sharp-tongued, fiercely loyal art gallery owner, had been her friend since college. She'd never liked Julian, calling him a self-help vampire who drains the life out of everyone and sells it back to them in a paperback. Chloe showed up one Friday evening, armed with 2 bottles of expensive wine and a container of pad thai. She took one look at the apartment, and Emma's gaunt face and her expression hardened. "Okay, that's it," Chloe declared, setting the food on a wobbly IKEA table. "The moping is officially over. Operation Phoenix begins now." Emma gave a weak smile. "I don't feel much like a mythical bird, Chloe. More like a pigeon with a broken wing." "Nonsense," Chloe said, pouring a generous glass of Sancerre. "You are Emma Vance. You can spot a forged Botticelli from 20 paces, and you can recite Vasari's Lives of the Artists backwards. That sociopath didn't give you your brain. He just tried to convince you not to use it. We just need to remind you who you are." Chloe talked for hours, her voice filling the quiet apartment with life. She spoke of new artists, of gallery openings, of the vibrant world that Emma had been cut off from. Slowly, tentatively, Emma found herself correcting a point Chloe made about the use of lapis lazuli in the Scrovegni chapel, the old fire of her intellect flickering faintly. "See, she's still in there," Chloe said, pointing at her with a shrimp-laden fork. "Now for the main event." She reached into her designer tote bag and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. The cardstock was heavy, expensive. The calligraphy was elegant. "What's this?" Emma asked. "This," Chloe said with a flourish, "is your re-entry into the world. It's the St. Jude's Foundation Annual Benefit Gala, the biggest art world event of the fall. They're auctioning off a recently discovered Degas sketch. Everyone who is anyone will be there." Emma recoiled as if the envelope were on fire. "Chloe, no, I can't. What would I wear? Who would I talk to? Julian will be there. He's a patron." "First," Chloe said, ticking the points off on her fingers, "I have a friend at Marchesa who owes me a colossal favor. You will be dressed in a gown that will make angels weep. Second, you will talk to me. And third, screw Julian. Seeing you there looking magnificent and not giving a damn about him will be like a stake through his narcissistic heart. It's the perfect revenge." "I don't want revenge, Chloe. I just want to be invisible. Too bad, Chloe countered. Invisibility is cancelled. You've spent a decade in the shadows. It's time to stand in the light. Not for him, not for anyone else. For you. Remember the woman who wanted to write the Gentileschi book? The one who was passionate and brilliant? She wouldn't hide from a bully in a bespoke suit. She'd face him. Emma looked at the invitation. The St. Jude's Foundation. The very name felt like a sign. She thought of Julian's parting words, the poison of his curse. You will die alone. Maybe he was right. Or maybe, just maybe, Chloe was. Maybe the only way to break a curse was to defy it. She took a deep breath, the first one that felt like it reached the bottom of her lungs in months. Okay, she said, her voice stronger than it had been all evening. Okay, I'll go. Chloe's smile was triumphant. That's my girl. Now let's finish this wine. We have a phoenix to raise from the ashes. The ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a galaxy of glittering chandeliers and even more glittering people. The air hummed with the low thrum of powerful conversations, scented with expensive perfume and ambition. Emma felt a wave of vertigo. For years, she had navigated these events at Julian's side, a silent accessory. Tonight, she was on her own, and it was terrifying. Chloe, true to her word, had worked magic. The Marchesa gown was a masterpiece of midnight blue silk that shimmered with every movement. It was elegant, understated, and fit her as if it were spun just for her. Her hair was swept up in a loose romantic chignon, and for the first time in a long time, the woman staring back at her from the reflection in a champagne flute looked not like a victim, but like herself. Stop hiding behind the ficus, Chloe hissed, pulling her gently by the arm. You look like a goddess. Own it. They circulated Chloe, greeting people with air kisses and sharp witticisms. Emma managed a few polite smiles, but her heart was hammering against her ribs. She kept scanning the crowd for Julian, a primal sense of dread coiling in her stomach. The auction began. The auctioneer, a man with a plummy British accent and a theatrical flair, charmed the room into parting with extraordinary sums of money for art vacations and experiences. Emma found herself genuinely captivated by the art, her professional eye assessing the works, her mind momentarily distracted from her anxiety. The main event was the Degas sketch, a delicate, intimate drawing of a ballerina tying her shoe. Bidding was fierce, paddles shooting up across the room. Emma watched mesmerized when she saw him. Julian. He was sitting at a prominent front table, his arm possessively around Crystal's chair, his paddle held high. He wanted the Degas. Of course he did. It was a trophy. Emma felt a chill and turned away, needing to escape. I need some air, she murmured to Chloe, slipping away from their table towards a set of French doors that led to a small, secluded terrace. The cool night air was a balm. The terrace was blessedly empty, overlooking a quiet courtyard garden. She leaned against the balustrade, closing her eyes, trying to will away the image of Julian's smug face. This was a mistake. She wasn't ready. It's a beautiful piece, isn't it, the Degas? The voice was deep, calm, and startlingly close. Emma's eyes snapped open. A man was standing a few feet away, half hidden in the shadows, looking not at her, but out at the garden. He was tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, but he wore it with a kind of casual indifference, as if it were a second skin. Yes, Emma found herself saying, her voice a little breathless. His use of line, it's so economical, but it captures the entire weight and strain of the moment. It's not just a pretty picture. The man turned his head slightly, and she caught a glimpse of his profile, in the dim light. Strong jaw, thoughtful eyes, an air of quiet intensity that was the polar opposite of Julian's performative charisma. There was something familiar about him, but she couldn't place it. Most people just see the ballerina, he said, his gaze now on her. His eyes were a startling shade of grey, like a stormy sea. You see the work. A blush rose on her cheeks. It was the first time in years anyone had seen her, and not the woman standing next to Julian Thorne. I studied art history. It was my field. Was he asked, a note of genuine curiosity in his voice. Is she corrected herself, a spark of her old self igniting? It is my field. He smiled, a small, genuine smile that transformed his serious face. Good. An awkward, yet not uncomfortable silence fell between them. From inside, they could hear the auctioneer's voice rising to a crescendo. Sold to Mr. Julian Thorne. Emma flinched, the sound of his name a physical blow. She wrapped her arms around herself, the cold returning. The stranger's perceptive eyes missed nothing. You know him, he stated. It wasn't a question. She gave a wry, bitter laugh. He's my ex-husband. The divorce was finalized yesterday. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. She instantly regretted it. Why was she dumping her baggage on this handsome stranger? But he didn't recoil or offer empty platitudes. He just nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. I'm sorry, he said, and it sounded like he actually meant for the turmoil, not for the divorce itself. She shook her head, trying to dismiss it. It's fine. I should go back inside. Wait, he said, taking a step closer. The space between them seemed to crackle with an unexpected energy. My name is Alistair. He extended his hand. She placed hers in it. His grip was warm, firm, and surprisingly gentle. A jolt, like a static shock, shot up her arm. Emma, she replied. Emma, he repeated, as if testing the name on his tongue. It was a pleasure to meet you, Emma, who sees the work. He held her hand for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. As she turned to walk back inside, her heart doing a strange, unfamiliar flutter, he spoke again, his voice soft. For what it's worth, he didn't deserve that sketch. He only sees the ballerina. Emma walked back into the ballroom, her mind reeling. She didn't see the rest of the auction. She didn't even notice when Chloe returned to the table. She was consumed by the brief, intense connection with the man on the terrace, Alistair. As the gala wound down, Chloe helped her navigate the exit. They were waiting for their car when a flurry of activity erupted near the main entrance. A swarm of paparazzi, who had been waiting for a politician to leave, suddenly turned their lenses towards the doors. Alistair emerged. And suddenly, Emma understood. The flashes were blinding. Shouts of his name echoed in the night. Alistair Sterling. The Alistair Sterling. The reclusive tech billionaire. The prodigy who had made his fortune in sustainable energy and now ran the Sterling Foundation, one of the world's largest philanthropic organizations. He was notoriously private, rarely photographed, and his presence here was a major event. He seemed unfazed by the chaos, his expression impassive, as his security team tried to clear a path. His gaze swept the crowd, and for a heart-stopping moment, his eyes met Emma's. There was a flicker of recognition, a ghost of the smile she'd seen on the terrace. Chloe was gaping. Oh my God, you were talking to Alistair Sterling, the great white whale of the Forbes list. Before Emma could answer, the crowd surged. A clumsy photographer stumbled backward, bumping into Emma and sending her off balance. She gasped, expecting to fall, but a strong hand shot out and caught her arm, steadying her. Another hand instinctively found hers, lacing their fingers together in a firm, protective grip. It was Alistair. He had broken from his security cordon and was suddenly right there, his body shielding hers from the jostling crowd. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low and concerned, meant only for her. She could only nod, speechless. The world seemed to slow down. The roar of the paparazzi, the shouting, it all faded into a dull hum. All she could feel was the warmth of his hand, the solid presence of him next to her. It lasted only for a few seconds. His security team quickly enveloped them, guiding them towards a waiting black sedan, a car far more imposing than the Uber they had called. He opened the back door, still holding her hand, and looked at her. "Let me give you a ride," he said. It wasn't a request. Dumbly, she nodded again and slid into the plush leather interior. Chloe scrambled in after her, wide-eyed. Alistair followed, and the door shut with a heavy, satisfying thud, sealing them in a cocoon of silence. The car pulled away from the curb, leaving the flashing lights behind. Emma looked down. Her hand was still linked with his. Across the street, hidden in the shadows, a freelance paparazzo, who had missed the main scrum, lowered his camera. He hadn't gotten a clear shot of Sterling's face, but he'd gotten something else, something intimate and intriguing. A close-up of their hands perfectly intertwined, a story in a single frame. He smiled. This was better than a politician. This was gold. Emma woke up to the sound of a hurricane. Not a literal one, but the digital tempest of her phone vibrating violently on her bedside table. It buzzed and chirped with a relentless, frantic energy she'd never experienced before. Groggily, she reached for it, her mind still fuzzy from the surreal events of the previous night. Alistair's driver had dropped her and Chloe off, a polite and formal goodbye hanging in the air. The feeling of his hand in hers lingered like a phantom limb. She squinted at the screen. 347 new text messages, 98 missed calls, a torrent of notifications from Instagram, Twitter, and news apps she didn't even remember installing. Her blood ran cold. This was the kind of attention Julian received, not her. Her thumb trembled as she swiped to open a text from Chloe. It was a string of incoherent capital letters and a link. "Chloe, Emma. Oh my God, holy Sikh, look at this now." With a deep sense of foreboding, she clicked the link. It took her to the homepage of TMZ. And there it was. The lead story, the photograph. It was an artful shot, tightly framed and undeniable. Two hands. Her hand, recognizable by the delicate silver ring her grandmother had left her, was entwined with a man's larger, stronger hand. The cuff of a tuxedo and a sliver of an impossibly expensive-looking watch were visible. The headline screamed, "Mystery Woman, Reclusive Billionaire, Alistair Sterling, in Shockingly Public Romance." She dropped the phone as if it had burned her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She scrambled to open other news sites. Page 6. The Daily Mail, Vanity Fair. It was everywhere. The same photo. The same breathless speculation. Who is Alistair Sterling's secret girlfriend? The handhold seen round the world. Sources say the woman is a stunning brunette who spent the evening at the St. Jude's Gala with the tech mogul. She was the mystery woman, the stunning brunette. It felt like she was reading about a character in a novel, not herself. Then her stomach dropped as she saw the comments section. The digital mob was already at work. Sleuths were trying to identify her. And then someone did. A gossip columnist with a long memory posted a picture of her from 3 years ago standing behind Julian at a book launch. The narrative shifted with whiplash speed. Update: Sterling's mystery woman, identified as Emma Vance, ex-wife of self-help guru Julian Thorne. And that's when the second storm hit. Julian's storm. He hadn't waited. He hadn't stayed silent. He had gone on the offensive with brutal surgical precision. He posted a statement on his Instagram, a platform with 20 million followers. It was a masterclass in manipulation, cloaked in his signature brand of faux vulnerability. The post was a picture of him looking pensively out a window, a cup of tea in his hands. The caption began, "Friends, many of you have been asking me about the recent news. It is with a heavy heart that I must address this. As you know, I have recently gone through a painful and private separation. I have tried to handle this with dignity and grace, wishing only the best for Emma. To see these photos today is deeply concerning." Emma felt sick. Concerned, I have always been a supporter of Emma, even as we grew apart. But I fear she is in a vulnerable place right now. To see her latch onto a man of such immense wealth and power so quickly, literally the day after our divorce was finalized, is alarming. I pray that she is not being taken advantage of, and that this is not a cry for help or a desperate attempt to fill a void. I am worried for her well-being. I will be making no further comment on this matter, as I wish to focus on healing. Please send her your positive energy. It was diabolical. In one fell swoop, he had painted her as a mentally unstable, desperate gold digger. He was the concerned, sensitive ex-husband. She was the pathetic, grasping woman. He had co-opted the language of therapy and wellness, a language she had helped him perfect, and turned it into a weapon against her. The comments were a tidal wave of vitriol aimed squarely at her. Wow, she didn't waste any time, did she? Gold digger alert. Poor Julian. He's so classy. She's clearly a mess. I knew there was a reason he left her. She sounds like a parasite. Hope Alistair Sterling sees her for what she is. She's just using him for his money. The curse. You're nothing without me. No one will ever want you. He was making it come true, not by magic, but by the brute force of public opinion. He was branding her, defining her for the entire world, before she could even speak a word in her own defense. Her tiny apartment felt like it was closing in on her. The brick wall outside was a prison. She curled into a ball on her bed, the phone lying face down on the floor, still buzzing, still spewing poison. The shame was suffocating. He had won. He had utterly, completely destroyed her. She had defied his curse for one night, and in return, he had unleashed hell. The tears she had held back for so long finally came not as a gentle rain, but as a racking, hopeless storm. The knocking was soft at first, then more insistent. Emma ignored it, pulling a pillow over her head to block out the world. It was probably a reporter or a process server with a cease and desist letter from Julian's lawyers for besmirching his good name. "Emma, it's Chloe. Open this door right now, or I'm calling the fire department and telling them I smell gas and a crazy woman with a vintage toaster." Reluctantly, Emma dragged herself to the door and unbolted it. Chloe swept in her face a mixture of fury and concern. She was holding a large bag from a fancy bakery and the morning papers, which she promptly threw in the trash. "Don't read that garbage," she ordered. "I've already seen it. That man is not a human being. He's a sentient, weaponized press release." Chloe took in Emma's tear-streaked face and crumpled form, and her expression softened. "Oh, honey." She enveloped Emma in a hug. "Don't you let him do this to you. Don't you let him win." "He already has, Chloe," Emma croaked, Look at what they're saying. The whole world thinks I'm some desperate, grasping social climber. He knew exactly what he was doing. Of course he did. Chloe said, her voice steely. This is his playbook. Control the narrative, isolate the target, publicly humiliate. He did it to that journalist who wrote a critical profile of him 2 years ago. Remember? He's a predator. Just then, Emma's intercom buzzed, making them both jump. Emma stared at it in terror. "Don't answer it," she whispered. "It could be the pizza I ordered for moral support," Chloe said, trying to lighten the mood. She pressed the button. "Who is it?" A calm, male voice, devoid of static, came through the speaker. "It's Alistair Sterling." For Emma Vance. Emma and Chloe froze, staring at each other in disbelief. Alistair Sterling. Here, at her third-floor walk-up in Brooklyn. "Let him in," Chloe hissed, suddenly galvanized. "For God's sake, Emma, buzz him in." In a daze, Emma pressed the button. A few moments later, there was a quiet knock on her apartment door. She opened it to find him standing there. He was dressed not in a tuxedo, but in dark jeans, a simple gray t-shirt, and a lightweight jacket. He looked younger, less intimidating, but the same quiet intensity radiated from him. He was holding a small, unassuming cardboard box. "Miss Vance." "Emma," he said, his grey eyes searching her face. He saw the tear tracks, the fear. His expression wasn't one of pity, but of a kind of grim understanding. "I know, this is an intrusion. May I come in?" She could only nod, stepping aside. He walked into her tiny living room, his presence making the space feel both smaller and safer at the same time. He glanced around at the bookshelves, his eyes lingering on the titles. "I came to apologize," he said, turning back to her. "My presence last night and my carelessness brought this circus upon you. I am truly sorry for that." "It's not your fault," Emma said, finding her voice. "It's his. It's my world that has invaded yours," Alistair countered. "And I have some experience with this, which is why I'm here." He placed the box he was carrying on her coffee table. "This is for you." She opened it cautiously. Inside was a sleek silver device. "It's a secure, encrypted satellite phone," he explained. "Untraceable, unhackable. My personal number is the only one programmed into it. Your current phone is a liability. The press can track it. It can be hacked. This is safe." Emma stared at him, bewildered by the practicality and foresight of the gesture. "I also saw his statement." Alistair continued, his voice hardening almost imperceptibly. "It was a cowardly and calculated attack. He is attempting to define you before you have a chance to define yourself. I will not allow that to happen." Chloe, who had been watching from the kitchen doorway like it was a tennis match, finally spoke up. "Damn right. But how do we fight back? He has 20 million followers who think he's the second coming." Alistair met Chloe's gaze, giving her a nod of respect. "You don't fight him on his battlefield. You don't sling mud. You render his attacks irrelevant by telling the truth, but on your own terms." He looked back at Emma, his focus entirely on her. "He's accused you of being a gold digger. So we show them you have no interest in my money. He's painted you as unstable. So we show them your strength and intelligence." A spark of anger, hot and clean, finally burned through Emma's despair. "He built his entire empire on my work." The words hung in the air. Alistair's expression sharpened. "What do you mean, his book?" Emma said, the story pouring out of her now. "The Architect of You. It was supposed to be my book. My dissertation was on the philosophical concept of the self in Renaissance art, how artists and thinkers of the time constructed their public and private personas. It was about authenticity, legacy, building a life of substance. I had a manuscript, years of research. Julian, he took it. He read it, simplified it, stripped out all the academic nuance, and repackaged it with pop psychology buzzwords. He stole my soul and sold it as a self-help guide. Chloe looked horrified. Emma, you never told me it was that direct. I was ashamed, Emma admitted. And he convinced me that no one would ever believe me, that it was our project. Alistair was silent for a long moment, his jaw tight. He looked from the pain in Emma's face to the bookshelves crammed with her life's passion. Do you have proof? He asked quietly. Drafts, notes, emails. Emma's heart leaped. Yes, they're in storage, old laptops, boxes of notes. I have everything. Alistair's expression was now one of cold, clear purpose. He was no longer just a handsome stranger or a reclusive billionaire. He was an ally, a powerful one. Then, we have a new plan, he said. We are no longer on the defensive. He wrote that he's concerned about you. Let's give him something to be genuinely concerned about. He looked directly at Emma, and for the first time, she saw not just kindness, but a deep, formidable strength that he was offering to share. He tried to take your voice, Emma. I think it's time the world finally heard it. The next week was a whirlwind of covert operations and quiet strategy orchestrated from Alistair Sterling's minimalist Soho office, a place that felt more like a modern art gallery than a corporate headquarters. There were no reporters outside, no paparazzi. Alistair's world was protected by a level of security and discretion that was an art form in itself. His team, a small group of fiercely loyal and terrifyingly competent individuals, retrieved Emma's boxes from storage. They worked with a forensic IT specialist who recovered every draft, every time-stamped note, every email exchange from her old hard drives. They laid it all out on a large conference table, a mountain of evidence that traced the intellectual genesis of the architect of you directly and unequivocally to Emma. There were her early manuscripts full of complex academic arguments next to Julian's later dumbed-down versions with his handwritten notes in the margins changing her phrasing into marketable sound bites. It was a clear and damning paper trail of intellectual theft. Seeing it all laid out, Emma felt a profound sense of validation, followed by a surge of cold fury. He didn't just steal my words, she said to Alistair, her voice shaking with emotion. He stole my entire thesis on life. And then he used it to lecture the world and me about authenticity. Alistair stood beside her, his presence a steady anchor. Over the past few days, their alliance had deepened into something more. They'd spent hours talking not just about Julian, but about everything. She learned about his own past with the media, a vicious, untrue story about his family that had made him retreat from public life years ago. He learned about her passion for Artemisia Gentileschi, and he listened, truly listened, with an intensity that made her feel seen and heard in a way she never had with Julian. A quiet, powerful intimacy was growing between them, forged in the crucible of their shared crisis. He won't get away with it, Alistair said, his voice low and resolute. Now, we need to choose our moment. The moment presented itself a few days later. An invitation arrived for Julian to be the keynote speaker at the Global Integrity Summit, a Davos-like conference for tech leaders and media personalities. His topic, dripping with irony, was truth and transparency in the digital age. It's perfect, Chloe said, her eyes gleaming. It's his home turf. He'll feel untouchable. The hubris will be off the charts. He'll have the whole event locked down, Emma countered, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. I can't just walk in and accuse him. "You won't have to," Alistair said. He tapped a few commands into his tablet. A picture of a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense haircut appeared on the screen. "This is Sarah Jenkins. She's moderating his keynote. She's one of the toughest investigative journalists in the business. She owes my foundation a favor for funding her documentary on dark money in politics. More importantly, she hates frauds." The plan was audacious. Sarah Jenkins, armed with a dossier of Emma's evidence, would conduct the Q&A after Julian's speech. She wouldn't ambush him with accusations. She would do it with his own words and with Emma's. The day of the summit, Emma felt sick with nerves. She wasn't at the conference hall. She was with Alistair and Chloe in a secure viewing suite nearby, watching the live feed on a massive screen. She had done her part. She had written a formal, eloquent statement and had given Sarah Jenkins her blessing to use her research, her words, her story. The broadcast began. There was Julian on a massive stage, bathed in a reverent blue light. He was at the peak of his powers, delivering a smooth, charismatic speech about the importance of living an authentic life. He even had the gall to reference his divorce. Recently, he said, his voice thick with false emotion, "I had to make a difficult choice to align my private life with my public values of honesty and growth. It was painful, but living your truth is never easy." Emma felt Alistair's hand find hers under the table. She gripped it tightly. Julian finished his speech to thunderous applause. He sat down beaming as Sarah Jenkins took the seat opposite him. She started with a few softball questions, lulling him into a state of comfortable arrogance. Then she shifted. "Julian, your book, The Architect of You, is built on a very powerful central metaphor of constructing a life. It's incredibly detailed. I was curious about your research process." Julian preened. "It was years of work, deep personal intellectual exploration. It really came from my soul." "Interesting," Sarah said, looking down at her notes. "Because I have here some academic papers from 2012, written by a then Emma Vance, that explore the exact same theme, the construction of persona in the Renaissance. The language is remarkably similar. For instance, you write, 'To be authentic is to be the sole architect of your own reality.' A fascinating turn of phrase. Almost identical to Ms. Vance's 2011 dissertation proposal, which states, 'The Renaissance ideal was to be the sole architect of one's public reality.'" A flicker of panic in Julian's eyes. The audience murmured. Sarah pressed on her voice like ice. "In Chapter 3, you discuss the facade of legacy, Ms. Vance's research uses the exact same term, the facade of legacy, in relation to the Medici family. On page 184, you use an anecdote about Michelangelo. That anecdote is lifted almost verbatim from an email Ms. Vance sent you in 2013, which we have a copy of." Shall I go on? The color drained from Julian's face. He was sputtering, trying to interrupt. This is an ambush. My work with my ex-wife was a collaboration. She was my partner. Was she a collaborator when you registered the copyright solely in your name?" Sarah countered, her voice sharp. "Was she a collaborator when you pocketed the entirety of the 8-figure advance? We spoke to your publisher. Her name is not mentioned on any contract. In fact, we have a statement from Ms. Vance herself." And then on the giant screen behind the stage, a picture of Emma appeared. Not a paparazzi shot, but a professional, dignified headshot they had taken days before. Beside it, her statement began to scroll. "I am not a victim or a gold digger," the statement read. "I am a scholar. The core concepts, the research, and the intellectual framework of The Architect of You were my work. I am proud of that work, and I will not allow it to be used to promote a false narrative of authenticity, nor to be used as a weapon to publicly shame me. The truth, as Mr. Thorne is so fond of saying, has a way of coming out. The room was in stunned silence. Julian Thorne, the great guru of truth, was staring at the screen, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. His carefully constructed world was crumbling around him, live in front of his most important peers. He was being exposed not just as a liar, but as a thief. The cameras zoomed in on his face, no longer smug, but pale and sweating. The architect had been unmasked, revealing nothing but a hollow frame behind the beautiful facade. The reckoning had arrived. The silence in the conference hall was a living entity. It was thick, heavy, and absolute. On the massive screen, Julian Thorne's face, once a carefully curated mask of enlightened confidence, was now a canvas of pure, unfiltered horror. The camera operator, sensing a historic moment, held the close-up, refusing to cut away. The world watched as the architect of you was publicly deconstructed beam by rotten beam. He didn't just look guilty, he looked erased. In the quiet viewing suite, the only sound was the sharp intake of Chloe's breath. Emma sat perfectly still, her hand held firmly in Alistair's. She wasn't watching Julian's face. She was watching the words on the screen. Her words, her truth, finally illuminated for all to see. It wasn't a feeling of triumph that washed over her, but one of profound, solemn relief, like a patient taking their first breath after a long and suffocating fever. The noise in her head, the constant echo of Julian's gaslighting, and her own self-doubt had finally ceased. Alistair squeezed her hand gently. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice low. Quiet, she whispered, a small, wondering smile touching her lips. "The storm. I think it's finally over." He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture of profound respect. "No," he said, his grey eyes soft but resolute. "The storm is just beginning for him. For you, this is the dawn." The fallout was a digital tsunami. Before Julian could even be escorted off the stage by stunned event staff, the clip was being sliced, diced, and shared across every platform. Thorne fraud. The Great Pretender and his stand with Emma Vance exploded globally. The initial trickle of outrage became a flood. Celebrities who had once touted his book as their Bible posted hurried statements of condemnation. Brands that had sponsored his podcast issued press releases severing all ties. His publisher, facing a public relations nightmare, released a statement within 3 hours. "In light of new information regarding the authorship of The Architect of You, we are immediately suspending all promotion and distribution of the title and will be conducting a full review of our relationship with Mr. Thorne." It was corporate speak for a public execution. Crystal, his model girlfriend, quietly deleted every photo of him from her Instagram feed. His powerful friends stopped returning his calls. The machine that had protected and promoted him turned on him with merciless efficiency. The final humiliating image came a week later, a grainy paparazzi photo of Julian unshaven and haggard in a wrinkled tracksuit, frantically putting trash bins out in front of his empty penthouse. The man who had preached about designing one's life looked like he had lost the blueprint to his own. Emma, however, refused to get drawn into the spectacle of his demise. While the world feasted on the schadenfreude she and Alistair were building, her new legal team, a phalanx of New York's sharpest minds funded by Alistair, moved with swift precision. The settlement meeting wasn't a negotiation. It was a dictation of terms. Emma sat at the head of the table, calm and composed, as her lawyers laid out the undeniable evidence of intellectual property theft and demanded reparations, not alimony, but a figure representing her share of the book's profits and damages for copyright infringement. Julian's legal team, knowing they were beaten, folded without a fight. With the first transfer of funds, she didn't buy a new apartment or a new wardrobe. Her first act was to sign the charter for the Vance Institute for Historical Studies. Its mission was clear: to fund and promote the work of scholars, particularly women, in fields historically dominated by men. Its first grant was awarded to a young art historian who had discovered compelling evidence that a famous sculpture attributed to a 17th-century master was in fact the work of his uncredited and forgotten sister. Her next meeting was with the acquisitions editor of a prestigious university press. The editor, a woman with kind eyes and a deep respect for academia, didn't just want to publish her original manuscript on Gentileschi. She wanted to publish a new expanded edition. "We also want you to write a new introduction," the editor said, "about your journey, about what it means to reclaim a narrative, your story. It's as important as the history you write about." For the first time, Emma cried. Not tears of sorrow or anger, but of overwhelming gratitude. Throughout it all, Alistair was her silent, steadfast partner. He never overshadowed her, never spoke for her. He simply created a space where she could be heard. Their relationship, born in the glare of a media firestorm, settled into a rhythm that was quiet, private, and deeply authentic. One evening, he came to her small Brooklyn apartment, the apartment she had decided to keep a reminder of, where she had started her new life. He found her covered in flour, attempting to bake bread, her tiny kitchen a chaotic mess. He didn't laugh at the mess. He simply rolled up the sleeves of his expensive shirt, washed his hands, and started helping her knead the dough. "You know," he said, his hands working alongside hers, "my life was very orderly before I met you. Every minute scheduled, every interaction vetted. I'm sorry for disrupting it," she said with a small smile. "Don't be," he replied, stopping to look at her, his eyes serious. "It was orderly, but it was grey. You brought the color back, Emma. You make the noise of the world bearable." A few months later, they stood on the terrace of his penthouse. It was a crisp autumn evening, and the city lights spread out below them like a carpet of fallen stars. The space, unlike Julian's cold, minimalist trophy home, was warm and lived in, filled with books stacked on every surface and art that was challenging and personal. He handed her an advance copy of her book, The Power of Persona Artemisia Gentileschi and the Forging of a Legacy, by Dr. Emma Vance. Her name, her title, her work. She ran her fingers over the embossed letters. "I used to stand in a place just like this and feel like the smallest person in the world," she confessed, her voice soft. "He told me that I was nothing without him, that I would die alone." Alistair wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her close. "He was a fool," he murmured into her hair. "A man that insecure could never understand a woman like you. He didn't understand the irony of his own curse." Emma leaned back against his chest, finally understanding. "He thought it was an ending," she said, a sense of wonder in her voice. "But it was a catalyst. If he hadn't said those things, if he hadn't pushed me out so cruelly, I would never have gone to that gala. I would never have met you. I would never have found the courage to fight for my work." Julian's curse wasn't a prophecy. It was an accidental gift. His attempt to consign her to oblivion was the very thing that had forced her into the light. He had meant to be the architect of her destruction, but instead, he had merely laid the foundation for her magnificent reconstruction. She turned in Alistair's arms, looking up at him. The love she saw in his eyes was not the possessive, conditional affection she had once known, but a deep, quiet partnership built on mutual respect and a shared truth. The city lights below no longer seemed to mock her, but to celebrate with her. It was a new dawn, bright and clear, and infinite with promise, and it was all hers. Emma Vance's story is a powerful reminder that our worth is never determined by someone else's opinion, especially the opinion of those who try to diminish us. It's a testament to the fact that the end of one chapter, no matter how painful, is often the necessary prelude to a far better one. Her journey from a cursed ex-wife to a celebrated scholar, hand in hand, with a man who saw her for who she truly was, shows us that the most profound comebacks are rooted in reclaiming our own truth and our own voice. Julian's curse was meant to be her prison, but it became the key that unlocked her true potential.